Welcome Primary 5 with you is Miss Noura Abdurrahman, and today we are going to start lesson number 2 on concept number 3 on unit 1. So are you ready to start? Let's go! Okay, the energy flow. Do you remember the energy flow? The energy is flowing between the living organism on a food chain or inside a food web. Okay, look into this food chain. Where is the producers? They are the grass. Excellent. Where is the primary consumers? The primary consumer here is the grasshopper. Excellent. Number 3, where is the secondary consumer? The secondary consumer is the mouse, which feeding on the grasshopper. Bravo. Okay, what about the tertiary consumer? The tertiary will be the snake because the snake is eating or feeding on the mouse. And what about the eagle here? The eagle here, it will be the top predator. So we have producer, primary consumer, secondary and tertiary consumer, and the last one it's the tertiary consumer, and the energy here returned back to the soil by the help of decomposers. Okay, when the energy flowing between the living organisms, how many of this energy transferring between the living organism? Is it all transfers? يعني when the mouse eating the plant, it will take all the energy of the plant? No, it's taking only 10%. So only 10% of the energy transfers between living organisms on the food chain. Only 10% of the energy transfers between living organisms on the food chain. Okay, what about the 90%? The 90% of this energy will left to the decomposers because when the animal die, the 90% will return back to the soil. So only 10% transfer between living organisms when they are eating each other, and the 90% will return to the soil by the help of what? By the help of decomposers. So when the mouse eat the corn, it will get only 10%. When the snake eat the mouse, it will get only 10%. When the owl eat the snake, it will get only 10%. Okay, when the owl died, how many percent will return to the soil? 90%. Excellent. Okay, look into this food chain and tell me what will happen to the lion if all the carrots were removed from the previous food web. If all the carrots will remove, the lion would have less food. Why it will have less food? Because there is no many living organism can eat because the fox number will decrease. Now let's start lesson number 3. Okay, does the pollution affect our food web? Of course, the pollution affecting the ecosystem and affecting the food web inside the ecosystem. Okay, how can the pollution affect the food web inside the ecosystem? The pollution in the environment leads to the death of organisms. So the many organisms, they are die because of pollution and throwing plastic on the water and make a smoke on the air. So the pollution leading to the death of many types of organisms. Okay, when there is a number of one type of organisms on the same area, they are called population. They are called what? Population. Again, repeat after me. Population. Population. Population means the number of one type of organisms in the same area. A number of one type of organisms in the same area, they are called population. So here we have a penguin population because they are a number of one type of organisms in one area. Here we have zebra population because this is also a number of one type of living organism in the same area. So population means a number of one type of living organisms on the same area. What is the factors which affecting the ecosystem? The amount of water affecting the ecosystem. Of course, when the water increase or decrease, this will affect the ecosystem. When the temperature change, this will affect the ecosystem. When the climate or the weather change, this is also affecting the ecosystem and the food web inside the ecosystem. Now, what will happen if the climate change? If the climate change, some population, do you remember the population? They are a group of animals together in the same area. Okay, population, if there is a climate change, Some population will increase and some other population they will decrease. So this is called population changes. This is called what? Population changes. Population changes. So when the population number increase or decrease, this is called population changes. Again, when the population number increase or decrease, this is called population changes. Okay. Now let's talk about the seabirds. Do you see the seabirds before? If you go to the sea, you can see the seabirds. Okay, the seabirds, they are building their nests, and nests mean the home of the bird. They are building their nests on the top of mountains. They are building their nests on the top of mountains. Okay, they are eating what, or what is the source of food for the seabirds? They are diving under the water or under the sea to feed on the small fish. So the seabirds, they are eating what? Small fish. The seabirds eating small fish. Okay, what about the small fish on the sea? The small fish on the sea, they are eating microorganisms. What is the microorganisms? They are a very small organisms floating on the surface of the sea. So we have the seabirds eating a small fish, and the small fish eats microorganisms. So the seabirds eat small fish, and the small fish eat microorganisms. The microorganisms is the type of a very small organisms floating on water. Okay, what is the microorganisms again? They are a very small organisms, and we cannot see it by our eyes. We can only see it by the microscope, and this is the shape of microorganism. Look into this picture. This is the microorganisms under the microscope. Okay, what is the food of microorganism? Does they eating any other organism? No. The microorganisms, they are making their own food, so they are producers. So again, the microorganisms are producers. The microorganisms are producers, so they can make photosynthesis and they can make their own food. Okay, what is the habitat of microorganisms? They live in cold water. They live in cold water, and they need the cold water to survive. Yani if the water wasn't cold, they cannot survive. They will die. Okay, what will happen now to the microorganisms if the climate change? What's the meaning if the climate change? If the climate change means if the weather change and it's become hot, what will happen to the water? The water will become warm. Okay, the microorganisms can live in warm water? No, it can live only on cool water. So the microorganisms will move into another area or another habitat where the water is cooler. Okay, when the microorganisms move into another habitat, what will happen to the small fish? The small fish which is eating the microorganism will also move into a new habitat. Okay, what about the seabirds? Some of the seabirds will die because they will not have any small fish to eat. Okay, and the other seabirds, they will move also into a new habitat. Now let's start lesson number 4. Why we need the healthy habitats in our food web. Why we need to live in a healthy habitat. The healthy habitat provide the living organism with air, food, water, and shelter. So to live in healthy habitat, we need air, water, food, and shelter. Okay, what will happen when the habitat destroyed? The organisms cannot survive. Why? Because they don't have any food or air or water or shelter, and this is will affect the food web in the ecosystem. Okay, what is the human activities that affecting the ecosystem? Number 1, building more buildings and roads. The human make what? Building more buildings and roads instead of the grass and forest. So when we are removing the forest and the grass and building more buildings and roads, this is affecting the ecosystem. Number 2, throwing the waste materials in water. When we are throwing the waste materials in water, this is called what? Water pollution, and the water pollution affecting the ecosystem. Number 3, the overfishing on sea and ocean. Did you remember the overfishing? It's catching many fish from the sea and ocean. It's also affecting the food web inside the ecosystem. So this is the human activities which is affecting the ecosystem. Okay, we know that these human activities, it's affecting the weather, because all of that, when we are removing the plants, so the carbon dioxide will increase, so the temperature on the earth is increasing every year the temperature is increasing. Okay, when the temperature increasing, is this is affecting the is this is affecting also the non-living factors and the weather? Yes, when we are burning forest or when we are cutting the forest, this is increasing the temperature. So when the temperature increase, what will happen to the organisms? Some organisms will die because they don't have any food or shelter, and some organisms will move into another habitats. So the human activities can also affect the weather. Okay, and all of these changes, it's causing to losing the habitats. And when the organism loses the habitat, it's may causing to extinction. And extinction means died, the all the type of organism died and disappear forever. Now let's talk about the coral reefs. Repeat after me. Coral reefs. Coral reefs. Coral reefs. Okay, do you see this picture? This is the coral reefs. This is the coral reefs. Okay. The coral reefs, they are some of the most diverse, and they are very valuable on the ecosystem on the earth. Okay, they are provide the fish for of what? They are giving the fish food and shelter. They are giving food and shelter for a large numbers of fish and marine organisms. Why? Because inside the coral reefs, there is an algae, so the algae can live inside the coral reefs. So the small fish come and eat the algae. So there is a food in the coral reefs for the fish and for the living organism. Also, some of the marine organisms, they are living inside the coral reefs. So the coral reefs provide food and shelter for the marine organisms. Okay, why they are important for the tourism? Number one, they help to increase the visitors and income for the hotels, restaurants, and other business. Why? Because a lot of people, they are travel and come only to see the coral reefs. Number two, some people also, they are traveling to coral reefs for fishing and diving. They are coming for coral reefs for fishing and diving. Okay, now let's talk about something called coral bleaching. Called what? Coral bleaching. Guys, the coral reefs, it's very colorful. What happened to the coral reefs to become dyed and white like that? What happened is that the water temperature rise or increase. When the water become warm, the coral reefs will get rid or throw the algae live inside it. We said that the coral reefs has algae inside it. Okay, when the water rising up or the temperature rising up, the coral reefs will start to throwing the algae. Will throwing what? The algae, or get rid of the algae. Okay, when they get rid of the algae, the coral reefs will turn into white color. And when it's turned into white color, it's not survive and it's died. The living organism and all the marine organism will move into another place away from the coral reefs because it doesn't have any food or any shelter. And this is called coral bleaching. Repeat after me. Coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. So the coral bleaching, it happened when the water temperature rise and the coral reefs turn into which color? Turn into white color. Why? Because they getting rid of algae. They are getting rid of the algae in their tissues. They are getting rid or throwing the algae from their tissues. So number one, why the coral reefs turn into white, or why the coral bleaching is happened? Because when the water temperature increase, the coral reefs get rid of the algae. When the water temperature increase, the coral reefs get rid of the algae. Okay, the coral bleaching has a negative effect on many communities, like the coral and fish community. Okay, how can the coral and fish community affected from the coral bleaching? The fish and other marine organisms which depending on coral reefs for food and shelter, they maybe they will die or maybe they will move into another habitat. Okay, what about the human? The human will has less food because when the fish decrease, the human will has less food, so it will negatively affect it. Okay, now let's talk about water pollution and throwing the plastic waste on the marine environment and how this is affects the ecosystem and the food web inside the ecosystem. Okay, the sea organisms don't find anything to eat it or feed on it except the plastic waste throwing in the sea. When the human is throwing the plastic on the sea, a large amount of marine organisms they are eating the plastic and they are die and the number of them is decreased. So when the amount of plastic increase in the sea, what will happen to the organisms? The number of marine organisms will decrease. Why? Because they are eating the plastic and they died. So what will happen to the energy flow or to the food web? We are breaking down or destroying the food web because we are decreasing the number of marine organisms in the sea. Okay, how do the sea turtles get harmed by feeding on plastic? The sea turtles they cannot differentiate between jellyfish and a piece of plastic or a plastic bag. They are thinking that the plastic bag is a jellyfish, so they are eating the plastic bag and they are died because they are thinking this is a jellyfish. So we should avoid throwing the plastic on the water. Okay, how do the coral reefs get harmed from feeding on plastic? Okay, do the coral reefs feed on plastic? Do you remember the coral reefs eating what? From lesson number 1? They are eating they are eating a zooplankton. Do you remember the zooplankton? So they are very, very small organisms on the water and we cannot see it by our eyes. Okay, how can the coral reefs get harmed from the plastic? Okay, because of the UV rays coming from the sun. What is the UV rays? Guys, in the sun, there is a good light coming for us. There is a good light, and some of the light of the sun is a very, very, very bad light. It's called UV rays. So the UV rays coming from the sun is a very bad light. UV rays coming from the sun is a very bad light. Okay, when the UV rays coming from the sun falling on the water, they are breaking the plastic inside the water. They are making what? Breaking the plastic inside the water. When they are breaking the plastic inside the water into a very small pieces, this small pieces, it's called microplastics. Again, it's called what? Microplastics. Again, it's called what? Microplastics. So the microplastics is a very, very small pieces of plastic and it's smaller than a grain of rice. It's very, very small. Okay, what will happen to the coral reefs? The coral reefs also, they are filtering the seawater to get the zooplankton, but they are getting what? Microplastics. So what will happen when the coral reefs eating white microplastic? The coral reefs get harmed and they are turned into a white color and died. So we have two reasons for coral bleaching. The coral bleaching can happen because increasing the temperature, and the coral bleaching also can happen because of microplastic. So the microplastic also can harm the coral reefs like the sea turtles. Okay, we have about 8 million tons of plastic throwing on the marine environment every year. Every year there is 8 million tons of plastic throwing on the water. So, and most of them they are coming from land. And these plastics they are harming and causing decreasing the marine organisms because they are toxic and sharp. Some organisms they are eating the plastic because so they are died because this plastic is toxic, And some organisms they are died because this plastic also is sharp. So the plastic are toxic and sharp. Why the plastic is harmful for the marine organisms? Because they are toxic and sharp. With you was Miss Noura Abdurrahman, and thank you for listening.